Hello Year 10, this is lesson 3 in the booklet B1.4, the circulatory system in humans. You will need a pen and a pencil and a red and a blue either pen or pencil today to allow you to show direction of blood flow of different types of blood. Blood with lots of oxygen and what we call blood with little oxygen, deoxygenated blood. Okay, so oxygenated and deoxygenated blood. So the objectives today are to make sure that by the end of this lesson you can identify and name the chambers in the heart, the blood vessels in the heart and the valves in the heart. Turn to page 3 in your booklet and you should be able to see this cross section through a heart. This is what we call the interior view of the heart. What it's asking you to do is to label the parts of the heart that you can see just by looking at the inside of it. Colour in red the route oxygenated blood takes through the heart, and in blue the route deoxygenated blood takes through the heart. So if we take our red pen to begin with, so just check we've got red here. This looks quite complicated, this version of the heart. I'm going to start first of all by explaining you should be able to see two top chambers, one here, and then two bottom chambers, one here and one here. The names of the chambers are called the atria and the ventricles, okay? So the top ones are the atria, that's this one, and the bottom two are the ventricles. I want you to imagine that the heart is a little bit like a house, like a box, okay? And in this house, it's what we call a 2 up, 2 down house, okay? There are 2 rooms at the top of the house and 2 rooms at the bottom of the house. So the atria are on the top, as we said, so I'm going to call those A for atria. And the ventricles are at the bottom, okay? When we draw the heart, whether we draw it like this, a complicated diagram showing the blood vessels kind of crossing over the top, because that's what they do, we tend to identify the heart, okay, as this side that I can see here, okay. This is what we call the left side of the heart. Even though as you're looking at it, it's on the right. Imagine that heart was actually in your chest, in your body, okay? And that would be on your left-hand side. So this side of the box, I'm going to put LA for left atrium, and this side of the box, LV, left ventricle. So if this is the left-hand side, the other side is right atrium and right ventricle, okay? So this is a basic structure. Now we know that blood doesn't come in the top of the heart and leave the bottom of the heart, because we can see in this diagram here on the right, okay, our blood vessels seem to cross over one another. But we're going to talk about how this model can help you, okay, to learn the route of the blood through the heart, off by heart, literally, okay? So that's the chambers, first of all, sorted. So as I said, I'm going to start first of all with oxygenated blood, and I'm colouring this in red. And the oxygenated blood has always come from the lungs because that's where it's picked up the oxygen. And it comes into the heart via these 2 little tubes at the side here, 2 blood vessels. And this is what we call the pulmonary vein. Veins come into hearts and arteries leave hearts. The reason why there are 2 pulmonary veins here is because you have 2 lungs. So one has come from the left lung and one has come from the right lung. This blood has lots of oxygen, as we've said, so it's described as being oxygenated. It comes into this first area, this what we call chamber. And this is what we call the left atrium, LA I've put there. So this label here is left atrium. Atria is plural and atrium is single. It goes through a set of valves here, and these valves are called the bicuspid valves. The reason they're called bicuspid is they've got two attachments. So bi means two. The blood goes through the valves when they open into the lower chamber, and we call this lower chamber the left ventricle. We've got the wall, outer wall of the heart here, okay? And we've also got this wall separating the left and the right side. So I'm going to put LV down here so you know this is the left ventricle. This oxygenated blood then is now going to be squeezed out of the heart when the ventricle, when this wall contracts and pushes in, okay? So as the heart muscle itself contracts and pushes in, it squeezes the blood up, out, through the heart, okay? Through this set of valves here, and these are called the Semilunar Valves, to leave the heart by this big main artery, and this big main artery is called the aorta. And you can see that the blood has got various routes. It is the biggest blood vessel. So when you dissect a heart, when you find the thickest, biggest blood vessel on the top of the heart, you will know that that is the aorta, the main artery taking blood away from the heart. So this blood, can we see, it goes behind this blood vessel up here, and the aorta splits off into three parts at this point, okay, as well as going back down behind the heart, and it would actually come out somewhere down the bottom down here, because this aorta is going to take blood to your head, to your arms, to your legs, to your main torso. Okay, so that's why it needs to go downwards to go to your torso and your legs. It needs to go upwards against gravity up to your head and to your arms on the left and right side. Okay, so the blood has to be pumping through this at really high pressure because it's got to get against gravity up to your head. Okay, so think about where your heart is in position to where your head is. Your head is above it, okay? It's got to be quite a powerful pump. So because of this, this side of the wall, the left side of the wall, is a very, very thick muscle to be able to do that. So this oxygenated blood is going to be dropped off now at the cells in the head, in the arms, in the legs, in the torso, so around your digestive system in particular. And it's going to drop that oxygen off for one purpose only, for respiration. Along with glucose, the oxygen is needed to release energy in respiration. Okay, so that's why the heart needs to pump this blood all around the body, okay, to deliver the oxygen to the cells where it's needed for respiration. So because the cells then use the oxygen for respiration, the blood now has very little oxygen. So I'm going to swap my colour because the blood is described as being deoxygenated now. And it needs to come back to the heart for a second pumping, okay? And the reason it needs to come back to the heart is because the heart is going to pump it to the lungs to go and collect some more oxygen. This is why we call it a double circulatory system. So the first thing we've got is we've got two blood vessels, one coming in from here and one coming in from here. And these blood vessels are veins, because remember, veins come into the heart and arteries leave. And these veins are called the Vena Cava. Okay, so that is their special name, the Vena Cava. And the reason why there are two, you have, just like we had the aorta splitting off to deliver the oxygenated blood up to the top of the head and down to the bottom of the body, the torso and the legs, okay? The Vena Cava come back to the heart, both from the head, where the oxygen's been used up in the brain, okay? Respiration, the brain has to carry out respiration too, but also from your lower torso and your legs too. And so scientists sometimes call this one that's come from the head, from the top of your body, superior. So think about the word superior and what you understand by that. It normally means better, higher, yeah? So higher meaning above the heart. And, oh, apologies. And this one down here is called the inferior vena cava because it's come from the bottom part of your body, okay? The lower down part, okay? So the vena cava now bring in blood that contains very little oxygen into this chamber. And remember, we said the top chamber is called the atrium. So this is now the right atrium. That's why I've put RA there, and we're going to label that up here, right atrium. It goes through a set of valves here, and these valves are called the tricuspid. Now, if you remember rightly, we said the valves on the left-hand side are called the bicuspid because they've got two attachments where they attach. So what do you think tri means? Tri should be 3, okay? So there are 3 attachments. And you can see it's a little bit roomier on this side, but also we've got a much, much thinner wall, and I'll explain why that's significant in a minute compared to the left-hand side. So through the tricuspid valve, into our bottom chamber, and remember we called this the ventricle, so this is the right ventricle. And it is squeezed out of the heart by an artery, not as big as the artery that takes oxygenated blood to your head, arms, legs and torso. And this artery has a particular name because it splits to go 2 ways, left and right. It's delivering this deoxygenated blood to the lungs, where the blood is going to pick up some more oxygen. And because of that, we call this pulmonary artery. Now, there was another blood vessel with the word pulmonary in front of it over here. The pulmonary vein that comes in on the left-hand side has come from the lungs. So this is from the lungs. The pulmonary artery is going to the lungs, okay? So whenever you see the word pulmonary, you know it's to do with the lungs. How can you remember the difference between the pulmonary artery and the pulmonary vein? Arteries, remember, travel away from the heart. So A for artery, A for aorta, okay, travelling away from the heart. And the pulmonary artery, travelling away from the heart, has to go to the lungs to go and pick up oxygen. And obviously, one side of this pulmonary artery is going to go to your left lung, over here. And this side is going to go to your right lung to go and collect more oxygen, okay? So hopefully that should be your sequence. So we've coloured in blue the route of the deoxygenated blood. Once the blood picks up oxygen in the lungs, the whole process happens again, and the blood comes in into the pulmonary vein in the left side of the heart. Now I did say I was going to explain why the wall on this side is slightly thinner. So we can see it's definitely thicker on the left, thinner on the right. The left needs to get that blood pumped, as we said, against gravity up to the head, down to the torso. Just consider where the lungs are, right, in relation to the heart. The lungs are literally either side of the heart. They haven't got a great distance, or hasn't got a great distance of blood to travel to from the heart to the lungs. So does it need to be such a powerful pump? Does it need to have such a muscular, thick, muscular, elastic artery? Does it need to have such a thick wall? Okay, because it's not got to pump it with as much force. This little section in the middle here, and I'm going to label it just by putting the label down the middle, is what we call the septum. The septum, okay, is the piece of muscle between the 2 sides of the heart, the left and the right. And we mentioned in our previous lesson that sometimes babies are born with a hole in the heart. So this might make a bit more sense now, because you can see if you had a hole in this septum here, even if it was a tiny one, then the oxygenated blood, let's get the red, can leak out of this side, and the deoxygenated blood can leak out of this side into here. That means if you start to mix your oxygenated blood with deoxygenated blood, it's not going to be carrying as much oxygen to all those cells in your body. It's not going to be as efficient, the process of respiration. Okay, have a look at page 4 then. So we're going to take each section of the heart, okay, the chambers, the blood vessels and the valves, and we're going to label those, okay, on the next few diagrams. So it might seem like we're repeating this a lot, but this is to get this embedded in your knowledge to understand. So pause the video and I want you to see if you can fill in, first of all, okay, the missing words. So inside the human heart, you should have got that there are 4 chambers, 2 on the left and 2 on the right. The chambers on the left-hand side are separated from the chambers on the right-hand side by, by a thick section of cardiac muscle called, and that was the last thing we labelled, the septum. The bottom 2 chambers are called the ventricles, and the top 2 chambers are called the atria, for plural. One on its own, remember, is atrium. Okay. Now you have a diagram underneath of a cross section through a heart, and all it wants is you to label the 4 chambers. So pause the video and see if you can add left atrium, left ventricle, right atrium, right ventricle. So this would be here our left atrium. We can see the valve here, and you can actually see what they've drawn in what we call the heartstrings, okay, or the tendons that actually attach, okay, the valve to the sides of the wall. And this space down here would be our left ventricle. Notice I've done it in red as well. I'm just continuing with the theme of showing which side of the heart has got oxygenated blood and which has got deoxygenated blood. So I'm just going to write in here LV as well as our little code. So on this side of the heart, we've got the right atrium. So we would label that RA. We can see the valve here, the tricuspid valve and the tendons, and this would be down here in this space, the right ventricle. So check you've got those labels added to your diagram. Turn over the page to page 5. Now we're now going to look at blood vessels of the heart. We're going to look at whether they travel to the heart or away from the heart. And hopefully you should be able to tell me now that blood vessels that travel to the heart are called veins, and blood vessels that travel away from the heart are called arteries. We also know that blood can either have lots of oxygen in it, in other words, it's oxygenated, or has very little oxygen in it because it's been used up in respiration, is deoxygenated. So this time it wants you to pause the video to label the names of the blood vessels. If you're struggling, I'll give you the names of the blood vessels up the top here. So we've got pulmonary artery. We've got pulmonary vein. So think about what that word pulmonary means. We've got aorta and we've got vena cava. Okay. So pause the video, see if you can add those onto the diagram. So just like I did before, I'm going to use certain colours just to help me show the oxygenated and the deoxygenated. So I'm going to use red for our oxygenated blood vessels, and I'm going to use blue for our deoxygenated blood vessels. So I always tend to start with oxygenated. Different teachers start with different things, okay? And we're going to come in on this side of the heart. Remember, this side of the heart, the blood is always oxygenated on the left-hand side. And these 2 blood vessels are called the pulmonary, and which one is it? Veins, because remember, veins come to the heart. the blood leaving the left side of the heart, and we can see it going up here through the semilunar valves, and it's going to go up through these 3 kind of places, up the top here and back down the bottom of the heart. Can you see it coming out the bottom there? This is the main artery that's going to deliver blood, okay, all around the body containing oxygen. And this is our aorta. So that's a pretty important blood vessel, okay? I'm now going to swap to my blue colour pen. And I've got blood coming in this time, okay, is going to be coming in from the bottom of the body, in other words, the legs and the torso, but also from the top of the body here. And it's coming into this space in here. And you also have like subsidiary blood vessels coming in from this place here. These blood vessels is called the Vena Cava. It's a vein. Vein, vena, V for vein, V for vena, okay? And if you want to be really fancy, they won't expect it in the exams. You could even tell me that this one is the superior vena cava coming in from the top, and this one is your inferior vena cava coming in from the bottom. So we've got one last blood vessel to label without carrying out deoxygenated blood. Oh, apologies, zoomed in. So the blood's going to pass into the lower ventricle. Try not to get that confused with veins and vena cava. And it leaves through the semilunar valves, and look, there are 2 tubes, so it's going to left and to the right side behind that aorta there, tucked behind. This is what we call the pulmonary artery. It's going to go away from the heart, A for artery, A for away, and it's going to go to the right lung, and it's going to go to the left lung. So they're both the same blood vessel, are both pulmonary arteries, but they're going to the left and right side of the body. Okay, so you can clearly see all of this side of the heart contains blood that is deoxygenated, and all of the left side of the heart contains blood that is oxygenated. Okay, so underneath that diagram that you've just labelled, you now have a table. And hopefully, if you've labelled your diagram correctly, you should be able to tell me where each blood vessel is carrying the blood from and to, and if this blood is oxygenated or deoxygenated. So pause the video, see if you can fill it in first, and then I will go over it. Okay, so our vena cava this time is coming in from our right side of the heart, okay? It is carrying, anything on the right is going to be, and I'm going to do this in the proper colours, okay, just so that we've got it colour coded, deoxygenated blood on the right hand side of the heart. And it's carried it from the head and the body, and it's going to take it into the right atrium of our heart. Our pulmonary artery is going away from the heart. It too is carrying deoxygenated blood. Sorry, I don't know why the pen keeps doing that, doing an upward stroke. And it's carrying the blood from the right ventricle, and the right ventricle squeezes and pushes the blood out through those semilunar valves, okay, and out through the pulmonary artery, and it's going to the lungs because it's going to go and pick up oxygen. So we're now going to swap our pen to red, because coming back around the other side now, this blood has come from the lungs where it's picked up lots of oxygen, so it's now oxygenated. So it's come from the lungs, and the pulmonary vein is going to bring it into the left atrium, into the heart. Whereas the aorta, this is what is going to pump this oxygen off around the body is taking oxygenated blood. Let's write blood underneath here. And it is carrying that oxygenated blood from the left ventricle. And it's going to take it all the way to the head and the body. So if you manage to get that filled in correctly before you checked the answers, okay, in this PowerPoint video, then you're doing very well. Next page we're going to do is page 6, and this is covering the valves. So this is the last part. So we've looked at chambers, we've looked at blood vessels, we're now going to look at valves. They're the kind of 3 main components, if you like, or parts of the heart. Valves are basically flaps. If you think about valves in your bicycle tyres, if you've ever pumped up your bicycle tyres, okay, they have what we call a one-way valve. So when you put the pump onto the valve to pump up the tyres, as you pump air in, air should go through this like little flap, this valve. The flap opens to allow the air into the tyre, so the tyre starts to inflate. However, when you take the pump off, okay, it shouldn't allow the air to come rushing out, okay? You might get a little bit comes out as you loosen it, as you unscrew the pump, okay? But the valve should close to prevent air actually escaping, okay? Now, in the heart, these valves control the flow of blood. They keep it going in one direction and they stop it from moving in the wrong direction, okay? There are 4 valves inside the heart, okay? We've got these valves that are in the main arteries, and they're what we call the semilunar valves. And they're the same on the left and the right. And then these valves on between the atria and the ventricles on both sides, here and here. So as I've shown them, they're like swing doors. So the blood comes through, but if it tries to turn back on itself, can you see? What it does is it closes the valve. So our blood comes through, but if it tries to turn back, it will close the valve so that it keeps the blood flowing in the right direction, okay? So these valves here are called, on the left-hand side, the bicuspid, and on the right-hand side, the tricuspid. So we'll put bicuspid and tricuspid valves. The valves are held in position by strong tendons, okay, and these are called, okay, heartstrings, which is quite sweet. And they're actually really, really tough. And if you did manage to dissect the heart, you'll notice it's quite difficult to actually cut through these. So these are our heartstrings that we can see holding the valves in place. And they basically stop the valves from trying to turn inside out, because that would be a nightmare if these valves moved up in that way, because they would prevent the blood, okay, trying to get through into the ventricle, okay? So, underneath, it says, label these tendons on the diagram above. Okay, we've done that one. And at the very bottom of the page, you can see the position of the lungs and the heart. And notice it's labelled the left lung on your right-hand side, as if this is in your body. To help you kind of understand that, if you pick up your book, and I'm doing this now whilst I'm talking to you, okay, because I'm so used to doing it in front of a class, and I'm putting the book on my chest to show you that if I now have the book with the lungs and the heart facing towards the laptop screen, my left hand is where my left lung is. My right hand is where my right lung is. Okay, so hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. It can be a bit confusing. Now, the last bit that I wanted you to have a go at doing, okay, to kind of fill up the pages up to page 7. I'm going to go back a second. So turn over to page 7. You've got a diagram of the inside of the heart. Now, this diagram is slightly different to the one that you can see currently on the screen, because this diagram is a much easier version. However, exam boards sometimes will give you the easy version, sometimes they'll give you the harder version. Why is this a harder version, this picture here in front of us? because our blood vessels seem to like cross over one another, and you've really got to use your finger, if you like, to follow the flow of blood through the heart. So if I rub off all of this a second so you can see. So what I tend to do is I imagine my finger passing through each of these, and that tube goes up there like that, and also down the back of the heart to go to the torso, and then blood coming in on this side is coming in here through into the ventricle, is leaving this side and is going to go off that way. So always have a go at like following it through the route with your finger. So you can see in this diagram on this page here, it's much easier because they've put both of the arteries up the top here, okay, next to one another. Now, the reality is the heart isn't that neat, okay? There are lots of blood vessels that kind of fold over the top of one another, okay? And I'm going to go back because I want you to see if you can add the labels that are at the bottom of page 7 to your diagram. Do not cut them out. If you cut them out, you're going to cut out the information on the back of this sheet. We used to do this as a cut and paste exercise. I'm afraid I'm going to ask you, can you add those labels in by hand writing them in? And my suggestion is, as you've done each one, as you've added the ones that you know first, do all the ones you know first, tick them off, and that way you can see what's left, okay? So this activity is best to do, okay, to test your knowledge, okay, without the diagrams in front of you, the other diagrams in front of you, okay? Don't think, oh, I'll just copy it from the front page or from the one that I labelled previously. See how much you can label, okay? Pause the video and have a go at doing this task now. So, for the answers then. First of all, we've got this artery carries blood around the body, and if you want to add its proper name on, you can do, okay, for a little bit of help. This vein carries blood into the heart from the lungs, so that should give you a big clue. What's it called? It's called the pulmonary, and it's already told us it's a vein. The left atrium has very thin walls. The valve, if we want to label its proper name in this one, it's the bicuspid valve, stops blood going back into the left atrium. The left ventricle has very thick walls. Remember we said this side of the heart, much thicker than this side, because this left side's got to get that blood against gravity up to the head and all the rest of the torso. We've then got this artery carries blood to the lungs. So if it's going to the lungs and it's an artery, we know it's the pulmonary artery. This vein carries blood into the heart from the body, and it's called a vena cava. It's looking nice and neat here because it's just one tube coming in, but the reality is it's several tubes. The right atrium has thin walls just like the left atrium. The atria are much smaller. They receive the blood coming in from either the parts of the body or from the lungs. It's the ventricles that are going to push and squeeze that blood out of the heart. The right atrium are a muscle too. They squeeze the blood down into the ventricles. So when the atria both squeeze at the same time, that pushes blood down. The valves open, blood goes down. And then the atria relax, that's the opposite of contract. The ventricles squeeze, and that closes the valves and forces the blood out through, out through the arteries of the heart. So, where have we got to? Right atrium has thin walls. This valve is our tricuspid valve. The valve strings or heart strings stop the valve turning inside out, and the right ventricle has thick walls, okay, but they're not as thick as the left. See, very thick on the left, okay, to pump blood to the lungs, okay, out through that pulmonary artery that we've already labelled. So if you manage to label all of those parts correctly without any help, without any assistance, you are doing extremely well. The last thing I wanted to do with you today I'm just going to end the show for this, discard my annotations, okay? And I'm going to get up a blank screen, whiteboard. Apologies, it's thinking about it. Because at the start of this lesson, I said that I wanted you to think of the heart as being like a box or a house with 2 up and 2 down, okay? So 2 rooms at the top of the house and 2 rooms at the bottom. And I said this side of the heart is our left and this side of the heart is our right, okay? And I'm going to use red on my left, so I should have gone over this with a red. And we call this top chamber the left atrium. We call this chamber the left ventricle. And we call this chamber the right atrium and this chamber the right ventricle. Now, I was shown this many, many years ago by my biology teacher. And it stuck with me and it helped me to remember. It may help you, it may not help you to remember, okay? But she said, imagine it as being like a box. And she said, obviously the blood doesn't come out the bottom of the heart. There's not a hole in the bottom of the heart. But she said, as blood comes into the heart, it comes into the left atrium and it comes in by the pulmonary vein. Because remember, veins come into the heart and arteries leave. Where's it come from? It's come from the lungs. And I've written it in red. Why? Because it contains lots of oxygen. It's going to go through a set of valves once it's gone into the atrium, called the bicuspid. And then it's going to go through, apologies, another set of valves called the Semilunar Valves. And it's going to be squeezed out of the heart by the main artery called the aorta. Where's it going to? It's going to the head and body. So all we've done is we've taken that route in that really complicated picture of the heart and we've created ourselves a little flow diagram, yeah? Flow diagram just tells us the order, and this sometimes can help us make sense of things and can help us to sequence things in the correct order, which is what you sometimes need to do to describe the route of the blood travelling around the circulatory system. So if we've done the left-hand side, we now need to swap to a blue pen. So our blood on this side is going to come into the right atrium. Can you remember what it was called? It's a vein called the Vena Cava, and sometimes we have the superior, the one coming in at the top, and the inferior, the one coming from the bottom. Where has it come from? It's come from the head and the body, and because it's been using up all the oxygen in respiration, I've done it in blue because it's now deoxygenated. So this side of our heart only deals with deoxygenated blood. It comes into the right atrium, it goes through a set of valves called our tricuspid. It goes into the right ventricle. It leaves the heart through the semilunar valves, out of the heart, away from the heart in an artery. What's the name of that artery? Hopefully you can remember. It's the pulmonary artery. And where is it going to? It's going to the lungs to go and pick up oxygen, okay? So this little diagram I can remember from when I was 14, 15, from my biology lessons, which was a very long time ago. If it helps you, you've got a couple of blank pages towards the back of your book, okay, the back cover included. It might be an idea to pause the video and to draw that little diagram down, okay? Because if you're the type of person that learns things in sequence, that out, do it in blue, learns things in sequence, then you have got clearly all of the names of the places where the blood has been, lungs and head and body, all of the names of the blood vessels, all of the names of the chambers, the atria and the ventricles, all of the names of the valves in the correct order, showing how the oxygenated blood moves through the heart on the left and leaves the heart by the aorta to go off to the head and the body, and all the sequence, the correct sequence of the deoxygenated blood that's come from the head and body where it's been dropped off, all the way through the heart, the valves, the chambers, the correct blood vessels to go off to the lungs via the pulmonary artery to go and collect oxygen. And this double pump, what we call a double circulatory system, is what moves your blood all around your body every day, day in, day out. And that is the end of today's lesson. Thank you.